Today we'll be looking at first place deck lists from Japanese City League tournaments, which are pretty equivalent to League Cups. Before we get into looking at the deck lists, I want to note that Japan has Terastal Fest currently legal in these city leagues, and the most important card from that set for playing the game is going to be this Budew card. So why don't we take a look at Budew before we get into the decks, because this is going to be in a lot of them. Checking the stats, Budew is in over 50% of top 16 decks across all of these city leagues that have happened between December 7th and December 30th. So Budew, 30 HP basic Pokemon, and it has a free attack, Itchy Pollen, that does 10 damage. During your opponent's next turn, they can't play any item cards from their hand. This is really strong. It's a free attack. It chips in a little bit of damage. This is a single prize Pokemon. It's searchable by Buddy Poffin, and it has free retreat. So this Budew is just a fantastic card that can slow the game down with chipping a tiny bit of damage, attacking for free, locking items from your opponent next turn. What seems to be one of the best decks in Japan right now is Dragapult with Dusknoir. So Dragapult EX using the Drakloak Stage 1, the ability Recon Directive, that's going to be a really strong part of the support for this deck. You'll notice that this list is playing 3 Lance, which allows you to search for Dragon Pokemon from your deck. So Lance can find you a couple of Drakloaks, maybe a Dragapult or a Dreepy as well. And of course, Dragapult EX is going to be the main attacker, doing Phantom Dive for 200 and then placing 6 damage on your opponent's benched Pokemon however you like. Sparkling Crystal in here makes that a lot easier to attack with. You can attack for just either a single Psychic or Fire Energy with your Dragapult EX. So that's really nice. I do feel like if you're using the Budew for the early game, you know, slowing the game down a little bit, hopefully, maybe Sparkling Crystal isn't absolutely necessary in this archetype right now, because there are a lot of really good ace specs to go around. I also want to note here is that they're playing a really thick Dusknoir line, 3 Duskull, 2 Dusclops, 2 Dusknoir, and they're only playing 2 Rare Candy. And I think that's a little bit of a heads up meta call, because this deck isn't the only one playing Budew. As you see today when we go through all these decks, almost every deck I'm going to show today is playing Budew. And that's because most of the top decks are trying to make something out of Budew. You know, other people are using it, so why don't I use it too and be able to item lock them? It's not like it's becoming the main strategy of a deck or anything, but when a card has free retreat and a free attack, and that free attack does something that hurts just about every deck in the format, you're sure to see this being included in a lot of different archetypes. I wanted to look at this Dragapult Charizard deck next, since we just looked at Dragapult. This list is not going to be using any Dusknoir, but it is again utilizing that Budew. Dragapult itself, Dragapult EX Dusknoir, is doing really well in Japan. I've seen some of the Japanese sites list it as an S tier deck based on how well it's doing in city leagues. Dragapult Charizard is not one of those higher listed decks, but this deck did get first place, so keep that in mind. You know, while I'm showing these decks today, everything you'll see here got a first place at a city league, but that does not inherently mean that it is, you know, one of the best decks. And next we'll take a look at Charizard Pidgeot, which has been doing pretty well for itself, and we'll see here that they are also adapting to the Budew, not playing it, but they are playing Grand Tree. Grand Tree is an A-Spec stadium, which allows you to search your deck for a Stage 1 Pokemon and evolve it, and then search your deck for a Stage 2 Pokemon and evolve it. So even if your opponent has item locked you, this allows you to get into a Dusknoir or a Pidgeot or a Charizard without the Rare Candy step. However, it varies how much you'll actually be using Grand Tree for specifically Charizard, because note that the Infernal Rain ability only procs if you play Charizard directly from your hand. Next, looking at a first place Gardevoir. Gardevoir is happy to use Budew and slow the game down a little bit. Of course, also has Klefki, which could be used for a similar thing. Not turning off items, but Klefki can turn off basic Pokemon abilities. So kind of choose which one of these are going to be better against a matchup you're against, or maybe you start with one of them and that's all you can get, so you settle for it. But they're both really great disruptors early to give you some more time to set up. Of course, Gardevoir EX is really strong because it has the Kirlia Refinement to draw cards, and then the Psychic Embrace ability to activate your attackers. I think we're seeing Cresselia here, and I'm seeing Cresselia in a lot of the Gardevoir lists. I think that's because of the Dragapult matchup. Cresselia really helps against that. As well does the 2 Munkidori with 3 Dark Energy help against Dragapult EX. So this looks to be how Gardevoir is developing because of the Japanese meta, with Badoo being played, the game slowing down a little bit. There's a lot less Regidrago over there. We'll talk about Regidrago a little bit today, but even when Regidrago has been dominating in the TPCI jurisdiction, it hasn't been that popular over in Japan. So that might just be an anomaly, and maybe Regidrago is still the best deck after Badoo comes out, and Japan just has a different metagame. They play different decks. But Gardevoir is really strong. I'm happy to see it doing well again, and it looks like Japanese websites like Pokekabook are rating this pretty highly, just under Dragapult. Next is Archaludon. So Archaludon EX with Dialga V-Star actually won the recent 5,000 person Champions League event. I'm not covering that today. There's other channels that have covered it already. It was a couple weeks ago. But Archaludon, 300 HP, Stage 1 EX Pokemon. It's similar to Charizard in my opinion because it can power itself up with its ability. And then it does a pretty decent 220, while also having the Duraludon's Raging Hammer as an option due to having the Relicanth in the deck with the ability Memory Dive that allows you to use your Pokemon's pre-evolution's attacks. So the main draw for Archaludon for me is that it has really high health, and then you can use Professor Toro's Scenario or Scoop Up Cyclone to kind of have a healing loop until you win the prize trade. So swing for 220, they swing back, you Toro, you evolve, you get your energy back. You swing for 20, they hit, you Toro, you evolve, you get your energy back, so on and so forth. And if you ever need to, you can copy that Raging Hammer to take a big knockout because it has the potential to do more than Archaludon's only attack, a Metal Defender. Next we go to Ancient Box. Ancient Box got second at the Champions League that I mentioned. And is seeming like a pretty big player still over in the Japanese metagame. We'll look at this first place list here from a City League, and they are using the new Miraidon with the Unrelenting Onslaught. Pretty solid single prize attacker, actually, using colorless energy, which is really great, so that this deck can just run 7 dark, don't need to mess around with any other energy types. And this one is playing the Munkidori for the Adrenabrain ability, which is really, really cool. And the ace spec of choice here is going to be that Brilliant Blender that allows you to search your deck for up to 5 cards and discard them. So it could really ramp up the ancient damage for Roaring Moon's Vengeance Fletching just out of nowhere. Next, we've got a first place Ceruledge EX Palkia V-Star deck, and even this is using Badoo. Would you look at that? Ceruledge EX is a very basic deck. Of course, don't get me wrong, it's a stage 1 Pokemon, but the strategy is very basic. You have one main attack, which is going to be Abyssal Flames with Ceruledge. Try to dump energy into your discard pile. It can get a little more convoluted when you think about the Palkia V-Star Star Portal and the Subspace Swell, and you can potentially use Radiant Greninja's Moonlight Shuriken. You have Munkidori as well with the Adrenabrain ability, so if you take a hit, you can then move that damage off of your Ceruledge or off of your Palkia, or maybe if they spread damage around with something like Phantom Dive, you could heal some of that damage off and put it onto one of your opponent's Pokemon instead. This deck is also using the Brilliant Blender ace spec, just like the Ancient Box, because the Abyssal Flames attack on Ceruledge needs a lot of energy into the discard pile, so Brilliant Blender is great for that. Next, we have a first place Raging Bolt list. Not really much to talk about here. I just wanted to show it for the purpose of demonstrating, yeah, Raging Bolt Ogerpon is still getting some first places over in Japanese City League events. It's not one of the most quantitative first place decks, but it is picking up some first places and a ton of other placements at City League. So still a solid deck. No new cards here to talk about, so we'll move on quickly from that one. Next is Lost Zone Box, and we have a pretty cool new card here to talk about, actually. So Lost Zone Box, if you've watched my best decks for January video the other day, you probably already know a lot about a lot of these decks. So I'm going to try not to go too in depth and bore you. But Comfey, Flower Selecting, Horse's Experiment, and Lost Vacuum, these are all going to put things into your Lost Zone, so then you can use Sableye Lost Mine, Cramorant's Lost Provision, and of course Mirage Gate, which accelerates energy. The new card I'm talking about here is this Regidrago. It has 1 attack, which is Jewel Break, 4 colorless energy, so it's a hefty energy cost, but Mirage Gate will help you get there. It does 100 damage, but if your opponent's active Pokemon is a Terra Pokemon, this attack does 230 more damage. That's a pretty specific number, 330 damage. It, you know, hits Charizard EX, hits Dragapult EX, so this Regidrago is pretty sick, coming out in the Terastal Festival set. It's called Prismatic Evolutions in English. I kind of jump between which name to call that set, but yeah, this is the other notable card, aside from Badu, that we'll talk about today. Pretty cool card being included in Lost Zone Box. Lost Zone Box is already a fine deck. It just has a Drago matchup, and then also just has some general consistency issues and just bad luck with Lost Zoning volatility like it always had. But it's still picking up some first places. It's not popular in Japan right now by any means. It's not one of the most successful decks right now by any means, but it is still around and hanging in there. Next, looking at Klawf Terapagos, and this deck's actually going to pop 2 Badus into the deck, really looking to bank on its attack and its free retreat as 2 really good attributes for this deck. Going second if you can't take a big knockout, maybe your opponent has a single prizer in the active, or you can't find the gust effect. You got this Badu to swing 10, no items, and then you try again next turn. It's also a great starter for you because it has free retreat, unlike any of the other Pokemon in your deck. However, you do have Latias EX to give all of your basic Pokemon free retreat, so maybe the free retreat part isn't too big of a deal for this deck. But yeah, I had just covered this deck in my best decks video, which is probably yesterday. If you're watching this video the day it comes out. So there's not really much changes going on here except just popping a couple of Badus into the deck. Because it's a really good card that's going to support most of the existing archetypes we already had in the format. Next is Lugia Arch Ops. This deck is still around. Lugia V-Star cannot be kept down. Getting first place is over in Japan. And it's actually using Dusk Ball, which is a reprint from the Diamond and Pearl era, and then was recently reprinted for the first time in over a decade at least. It was reprinted in Surging Sparks. So Dusk Ball lets you look at the bottom 7 of your cards and get a Pokemon. It's basically just backwards Great Ball. So this deck's playing 4 Capturing, 4 Ultra, and 4 Dusk as the ball lineup. The new card here, the new card from Terastal Fest, is again that Regidrago like Lost Zone was playing. Swing 230 at a Terra Pokemon, so that's even easier to do with the help of Arch Ops in this Lugia deck. They're also playing Drapion, which is a counter to Gardevoir, because you could just power this thing up, boss up a Guardy, one-shot the Guardy. So this is a more basic focused Lugia deck, not playing the Cinccino line. Here we have a Snorlax Stall deck, and nothing really to write home about for this deck except for 2 card inclusions. So Snorlax Stall, I'm sure everybody knows all about it, how annoying it is, what it does, but there's 2 cool cards here that go together. So Klefki and Gravity Gemstone. So Klefki, I was like, what are we doing with Klefki here? We're trying to either treat lock the opponent, or we're trying to wall them out with Mimikyu and Cornerstone. But the Gravity Gemstone is really the key here for understanding Klefki, in my opinion. So if you're against a deck with Latias EX in it, or you're against a deck with Pekarunt EX in it, those both allow your opponent to get out of Snorlax's block retreat. So if you're against a deck that's using Pekarunt EX, which allows you to choose a Darkness Pokemon and send it up into the active, that gets around Snorlax's block. However, if you have Klefki in the active, they can't use that ability. But Klefki in the active isn't that great because you're not actually blocking them from retreating. However, you add a Gemstone into that, and now the retreat cost is +1 more, and maybe you can actually get something going with Klefki in the active to turn off Pekarunt, attach Gravity Gemstone. Maybe they can't attach enough energies to actually get out of there, and you can kind of have this pseudo-retreat lock with Klefki plus Gravity Gemstone. I think that's what the Klefki is there for, but of course, correct me if I'm wrong if you got any other ideas as to why it's there. Next, we've got Miraidon, which has a whole bunch of different basic Pokemon in here, including the new Badoo. So, yeah, Miraidon not really changing too much, having a ton of support Pokemon. We've talked about this on the channel before. Miraidon's just able to have so many support Pokemon now because of Area Zero Underdepths expanding the bench to 8 Pokemon wide. And yeah, they're trying out this Badoo in here, maybe buy a turn when you can't get the attack you want, similar to what I was talking about with Klawf Terapagos. Maybe you need to take a 2-prize knockout every time to stay on the prize trade. You can't do that, so you go in with Badoo, item lock for a turn, and then get it together next turn for the 2-prize KO. Then we've got a Roaring Moon EX deck. Speaking of Pecker on EX, this could be exactly what that Snorlax with Klefki Gemstone was trying to counter, maybe. So for example, maybe they're trying to like bring up Radiant Greninja and then put a gemstone on, and then okay, now the opponent has to attach twice to Radiant Greninja to retreat it. Maybe that's the plan. It doesn't sound very good. So again, if you guys have any other ideas about that Klefki gemstone, let me know. But because that's the idea I have so far for why it's in that Snorlax deck. But on Roaring Moon EX, this is just a pretty speedy basic beat stick deck. You're going to try to take 2 prizes every turn. That's mostly the name of the game for, I'd say, maybe like 60-70% of decks right now, maybe even more. Just trying to take 2-2-2 and do it as quick as possible. And Roaring Moon EX is one of the decks that can do that. And lastly, I said we would get to Regidrago. We're getting to Regidrago. I clicked on multiple first place deck lists from City Leagues of Regidrago, and none of them were satisfactory in my opinion. This is not even the, I guess, what I would call the worst one that I saw, but it's very, very different for what I'm used to. I mean, we've got the Dragon Pokemon lineup is really thin. Just 2 Dragapult, 1 Kyurem, 1 Tina. There's no Alolan Exeggutor, there's no Goodra. Those are 2 cards that I really like to see in these decks. They are also playing Hawlucha in here, which is a card that we've seen get cut from Regidrago by a majority of players. They're playing Latias EX, which I don't really get in here too much. I don't think that's good. They're playing the Badoo, which I haven't tried it in Regidrago V-Star yet. It's definitely an enemy to Regidrago V-Star, so interesting to see it being played in here. And, you know, I'm not going to knock this list too much because it did get first place, but keep in mind, these are 64-person tournaments, typically best of 1, I believe. So they're not the greatest validity for seeing which deck lists, which archetypes are the best, but if a deck gets first place, the player or the deck or combination of the two had to do something right. I just don't think this is a very good Regidrago V-Star list. So thank you for watching today's video as we go through a whole bunch of first place City League deck lists in the Brilliant Stars through Terastal Fest format. Make sure you subscribe to the channel for more content. Check out the description for educational content, one-on-one coaching, and other ways you can support my content and my Pokemon TCG career. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.